Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here today, the invitation, Roger and the gang. 15 minutes. I'm going to have to get a clock out here and time me and pull me off the floor. When I start talking this stuff, I get all carried away. But number one, really appreciate the opportunity to be here myself. 37 years in oilfield services. I started off on the front lines as a mechanic and fell in love with rigs and had an opportunity to work onshore and offshore around the world in the North Aegean, Siberia, and both sides of Australia. And I'll then work my way up through the ranks and into operations and then back to university for my MBA. And in about 7 years, I took over the CAE, or the PSAC, pardon me, and then in that 7 years, I took the CAE designation program to get my Certified Association Executive. And it's been a nice fit for me. Just with the industry experience and then running an association, get to talk about oil and gas and talk about our membership here and the experiences. So about Petroleum Services Association, it's been around 35 years. We're a Canadian National Not-for-Profit Trade Association representing oilfield. The talk here today is just a bit of insight into going global and government aid. So a couple of years back, I had the opportunity to travel with the Prime Minister right after Putin got a little bit silly over there in the Crimea. The Prime Minister, Harper, the day was the first Western leader to go into the Ukraine and offer support, and he took PSAC along with him. Part of the threat to the Ukraine was the pipelines coming through Russia, and the rationale for us being there was to introduce the technologies that we've developed across North America with respect to getting at tight shales and tight rock for oil and gas. And so my presentation here today is about government support for the industry and going international, and this is just an indication of the level that the federal government recognizes what Canadian Oilfield Services have to offer. And interesting experience going over there. But about PSAC, as I mentioned, we're a national trade association. Since I've been at PSAC, I've had opportunity to travel not only to the Ukraine, but over to China, to the UK, to India, South America. Again, talking about Canadian Oilfield Services, and those are all through trade missions, either provincially or federally. Part of the Alberta government's economic diversification isn't about just trying to broaden the industry, it's also about raising awareness of the ability of Canadian Oilfield Services companies to expand their trade development. We are on the front lines of the industry. No, I'm getting way ahead of myself here. But yeah, so PSAC, like I said, we represent pretty much everything it takes to get oil and gas onto the ground, from everything from the seismic data acquisition right through to reclamation and well decommissioning, land reclamation and well decommissioning. Our members are, when I was in industry, I worked for an international outfit, and we were manufacturing drilling rigs. And the rigs that I started on back in the day, were the old school drilling rigs, guys outside and tripping pipe and running the brake handle. Today, that rig in the top left-hand corner is actually walking itself from one multi-well pad location to another multi-well pad location, and all self-contained, so all the fluid in the tanks and the drill pipe and the derrick, and then just essentially taking offshore platform technology and putting it on land, and then walking itself and saving all the costs of demobbing and rigging back up again. And then down to the cyber chair here that we call it, where the driller is operating in a climate-controlled cab, operating the rig, pretty much everything on the rig right from that cyber chair, dual joysticks and touch screens. And it's even evolved beyond that, where some of our members now are using software and computer process management learning technology. So essentially, it's like when you're flying and you know you've got a couple of pilots up front there sitting in the cockpit, but you also know the computers are basically flying that aircraft. Well, that's what we're doing now with rigs, is using that similar type technology to trip pipe and just essentially run the rig. And our members are working towards fully robotic rigs. They're not too far in the distant future when you can have them walking. You can set up a multi-well pad. They can drill 10 or 15 wells from one location. And then the rig itself can be kind of like go on autopilot. And there's some of our member companies that are already showing the efficiencies with respect to how well the computer runs the rig versus tripping pipe and stuff versus a human being sort of a thing. So this is the kind of stuff the world wants. This is what we're developing here in Canada, and it's beyond just the drilling side. It's environmental, it's health and safety. It's everything from cementing, hydraulic fracturing, directional drilling. And you know, we're part of that whole North American renaissance happening in the US right across into Canada. And the world wants it. They want what we have. Going global. My first experience going global was as a hand. It was a labor contract. So I was a mechanic on an offshore drilling rig, and that's how we used to offload and unload in stormy seas. They still do it today. They've actually got much safer pods than what we use, but that's very similar to what we used to get on and off the rig. But again, it was people and equipment, and that was in where I was at the first time was in the North Aegean, and it was a Canadian-built Draco rig, designed specifically for a permanent offshore platform. There was 3 platforms. Penrod 58, an American-U.S. jack-up drilling rig, was on the one platform while we were on the other working over wells. So drilling on one platform, working over on another, and then the third platform was an upgrade, a refinery platform. But again, it was Canadian people, Canadian equipment, and this was a long time ago. And then into Western Siberia, we flew 9 Antonov 124 plane loads of equipment out of Calgary here. That's driving a rig complete with a service rig, complete with a derrick on, backing it onto the aircraft. We pretty much had a complete unit, complete service rig operation in that, loaded onto that aircraft. And then when we landed in Surgut, and we had to drive 300 some odd kilometers on roads we had no idea anything about, up into Coglum, and then that bottom picture was our competition of the day. And I just remember thinking back, we were probably about 30 to 40 years ahead of them with respect to the technologies then and the equipment that they were using. And again, Canadian equipment, Canadian people. The funny aside story to that is we moved in, we rigged up Canadian style, a 24-hour operation, 2 crews, 2 shifts, daylights and nights. The tool push stayed on location. He'd come to camp for a meal, but pretty much stayed on there the rest of the time. And then 2 crews, when we rigged up, first off, the local folks told us we'd never last a winter. Our safety policy here in Canada is we won't rig on a rig at 45 below just because the metal gets brittle, but if we're rigged up and it's relatively safe, then we'll continue to work. We hit temperatures of about 50, 55 below in Western Siberia there, but it was a normal winter for us. We rigged up, nobody would come around for about a couple, 3 or 4 weeks, and we started hiring locally drivers, interpreters, and we found out about 2 weeks into it, talking to the locals and through the interpreters, that they thought we were prisoners sent over from Canada. So nobody comes to Siberia voluntarily, and nobody really works like that willingly, sort of a thing. And but after we got to know each other, everything worked out. But and then we did. We hired locally. That was part of the contract, and trained to take over maintenance of rigs and stuff like that. But again, the next experience was interesting. And then my first experience in Australia was off the west coast on Barrow Island. A Canadian, we bought a company down there with 3 service rigs, and we brought a drilling rig down to expand operations. And again, Canadians going forward, and the whole point of this, or part of this, my experiences to date, even though I was still like in the field level sort of thing, was I wasn't aware of any government support whatsoever, provincially or federally. These were just entrepreneurs striking deals and going about it. I mean, there could have been something back there, but there was no evidence of it from my experience at the time or my memory thinking back. But I mean, this operation here, we bought into Australia, and we're going to use it as a jumping off place for getting farther into Indonesia, and the opportunity is there. And then this was my last adventure internationally before taking on PSAC. I'd actually, by this time, I'd come back, gotten into operations, worked my way up through the ranks, like I said, and I'd no sooner graduated with my MBA that my boss said, "You've got experience in Australia. I'm sending you back down there as business development." And so off I went, and the whole intent was the gas prices had sunk here in Canada, and we had built a bunch of coil tubing rigs, hybrid coil tubing over top drive over coil tubing rigs, really well designed for the coal bed methane fields. And so I was sent down there to put the rigs we had built in Canada to work there, which were ideally fitted or suited for the work. So off I went, but again, I was more or less thrown in there. I was traveling back and forth for 6 months, and then I moved down and set up an office, and I did everything myself, like all the visas, the financing, the legal, the safety, manufacturing, and then had to work up to get onto bid lists with the 4 majors there, and finally got on the tender list and submitted a couple of tenders. But it was pretty much done by ourselves, by the operations there, and the international support there, and then ourselves. But it was only after I came back and settled back and took on PSAC and started getting involved in our members and the international opportunities that I realized everything that was going on. And I can tell you in hindsight, I wish I had the support that's available today when we went into Australia. And that's the whole point of my message here today, is that now, between the federal government and the provincial government, there's endless amounts. And if there's any interest, you've got Kim's got my contact information. I'm more than happy to introduce you to folks, because we've got provincial funding to work with the University of Alberta to develop a 2-day program to help our members expand their export development abilities. We've got funding from the Alberta government to host international networking breakfasts, where we've done Mexico, the US, and we're working on the UK right now, where there's opportunities for members to go. And again, it's funding. And then PSAC has an MOU signed with the federal government, where we have a senior trade commissioner from Global Affairs Canada embedded in our office. It's been going on, I signed that just about right when I started, so about 7 years now. The intent there is that the federal government gets a finger on the pulse of oilfield services in Canada, and we in turn get access to Trade Commissioner Services offices around the world. So Global Affairs Canada, the government of Alberta with respect to the training, and then being allowed to, or being invited to go on different missions around the world to represent Alberta and the technologies. And then the Economic Development Bank of Canada, a good resource. They have funding available for companies. ATB, Business Development Canada, and the Canadian Commercial Corporation. Every one of these has different levels of funding, and they have business support, business development, and different levels of risk areas where they'll help you develop a business plan right through the Canadian Commercial Corp. If you want to go into some place that's a little bit, sketchy, for lack of a better term, say into Ukraine or Siberia, where there's different operating rules, they'll help you de-risk, in the sense that they'll strike the deal with whoever it is you want to work with, and then you basically build through them. So they take the risk out of it. So there's every level of support imaginable, right from helping you develop a business plan right through to helping you get in country. And then just recently I was up at the University of Alberta working with the folks there that helped us do the 2-day program. And we're going to reactivate that for 3 more sessions, but there's also a number of other initiatives, like Rainmaker is working with, they've got funding through the federal or provincial government to help take it to that next step. So you can develop business opportunities through funding, get you started. It helps pay for consulting, it helps pay for trade missions, helps offset the costs. But this latest one now is actually, there's government funding to help you work with this outfit to get one-on-one consulting services. So if you're like deadly serious about going, you've got a market identified, and products identified, then this group specializes in coming in and just helping you more or less cross the T's and dot the I's to get going internationally. And then picture here is there are still levels of support. This was about 3 months after our new Prime Minister came in. PSAC got an opportunity to meet with the Prime Minister, the Premier, our Energy Minister here in Alberta. Minister Carr is in the room, as well as Kent Hare. We had an hour and a half with the Prime Minister. I had about 9 or 10 directors with me from our board talking about Canadian opportunities. So again, even with the change in government, as frustrating as it is to try and get pipelines built and get things done in Canada, the whole world still wants what we have to offer here. And they do recognize it and do still provide support. So that's kind of it, just kind of my experience over the 35 years, starting from very little support to a lot of support from my experience to date. And again, just more than happy to answer questions or to follow up with anybody that wants introductions into any one of these outfits, whether it's the GAC or BDC or EDC or CCC sort of thing. I'm more than happy to help. But that's kind of it for me. So more than happy to answer any questions or any follow-ups. A member of PSAC, you can't just sign up sort of thing. I won't say go so far as to say it's a private club, but in order to be a member of PSAC, you have to have a core certificate of recognition, like a safety designation, sponsored by members in good standing sort of a thing. So PSAC members are recognized as being, a little bit above the rest, so to speak. I have to say that because I run the association. But no certification or accreditation like to say that you're internationally qualified to go overseas or anything like that. PSAC did in August. We went down to Washington and we met with the Petroleum Equipment Services Association. We met with the Kenny Jordan and his group of the Energy Supplier Services Association. Pardon me, I've got their names not off the top of my head, but PISA and ISA, and the IADC, the International Association of Drilling Contractors, just to compare notes with respect to the impacts of NAFTA. Not so much that the services sector would be directly impacted, but our customers are, and any kind of unintended consequences through energy harmonization or any kind of, we're watching very closely. At this point in time, we don't see anything significant happening, but labor mobility was one of our cross-border concerns. Like that was a concern across all of us, because we have members with American, like the Halliburtons and Schlumbergers on the U.S., or they're also our members here in Canada. They want to have ease of access or cross-border mobility to be able to bring crews up and back and forth when we're busy here and they're slow there, sort of a thing. And so those are the kind of things we're talking about, and making sure that none of that gets impeded in any way. Because right now it's not bad, it's relatively easy. It could be better. So making sure that we continually improve and that NAFTA discussions don't take away from what we've got happening right now. So, but we're just in the process of figuring that out. So I'll follow up with you. Happy to.
Mark, can you just speak a bit to the different types of energy companies that are part of PSAC? So if you have is there wind as well?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a very good one. Actually, I should have had that in my opening pitch. We're Petroleum Services Association, but just under 2 years ago, the board, we did a strategic review and realized, because our members are starting to use alternative and renewable energies. They're using solar, they're using lithium-ion batteries, because our members are going that way, because we recognize as a sector that Canada needs an energy mix or an energy blend across all of Canada. We changed our membership. We opened it up to, we'll take services companies supporting other industries. So I've sat on at wind energy symposium panel discussions. We've got geothermal company. One's joined us already. There's a second one. I think geothermal seems to be the easiest fit for us right now, because they're actually thanking the oil and gas industry in Canada for spending billions, if not trillions of dollars on infrastructure development for them without respect to all the wells. And that's one of the projects we're working on right now. Is we've got like 80, there's a whole bunch of different numbers, but anywhere from 80 to 100,000 or more inactive wells in Western Canada. And a lot of these wells could be repurposed for geothermal. And actually, the town of Hinton is, the mayor is a super big proponent for repurposing wells in that region for geothermal. So we've got a couple of member companies that are actually working with geothermal companies to directionally drill and connect well bores subsurface, so interconnect two existing well bores below the ground and then create a closed loop geothermal system that'll create heat and not just for heating the town, but they're looking at heating greenhouses. Like Norway, I believe, they export 300,000 pounds of tomatoes annually, and a lot of that is grown year-round through greenhouses. There's no reason why Alberta can't do that or Western Canada can't do that. So yeah, no, we've opened up our membership, and the one thing that we have learned, we've met with the associations representing nuclear, hydro, coal, wind, solar, geothermal, just to kind of understand what issues they have and if we can collaborate or support, and just, you know, if we're going to open up our membership to other forms of services companies supporting other forms of energy, then we need to know a little bit about it. The one thing we learned through all of the discussions is an acronym called CAVE, C-A-V-E, Citizens Against Virtually Everything. You know, like, you know, every one of these energy sources has got somebody that doesn't like them, you know, so you can't win. But I mean, the bottom line is that Canada, North America, we need an energy mix, you know, where it makes sense as we transition forward. And so yeah, we're still in the learning stages, but we do have one geothermal company joined us. And like I said, that's kind of a natural to repurpose existing wells and stuff. So thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate it.